Hey everyone, Kevin here from Skywatcher, and welcome to the Skywatcher What's Up webcast. My name is Kevin Lagore. I'm the product specialist here for Skywatcher in North America, and this is our What's Up webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here on the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. These are live at the time of recording, but they are saved on our YouTube channel if you ever want to go back and watch them. We cover everything pretty much what we feel like doing, from what's up into the nighttime sky to equipment to helpful tips and tricks on imaging and observing. And then, of course, at the last Friday of each month, we have a special guest with us. So this week, we're really excited. We have one of our really good friends here, Don Pettit. He's a NASA astronaut. He's been to the ISS 3 times. He's got 370 days in space, I think. Way more than I do. And just an all-around great guy. So Don is here from Houston. I'm going to go ahead and bring him in, and we'll get started. Let me pop that up when it wants to work. Bear with me, guys. Make Don bigger. There we go. So that's better. So fun stuff with the Zoom. That's better. Okay. Let me bring Don in here. Perfect. So good morning, Don. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. I could talk about one of my favorite hobbies, amateur astronomy. I could talk about this kind of stuff for hours. So you better settle in with a big cup of coffee.
Yeah, I wish we had more than an hour. I know we've been to events where we've a whole evening or day has basically just burned through with, but I know you could tell stories day in and day out. So, but definitely thanks for taking the time on a Friday to sit and chat with us about this. So I guess to get things started, I like to ask everyone the same question who's on, and that's, how did your interest in space or astronomy start?
My interest in astronomy and space started when I was a little kid, and you just look up at the sky and you say, wow, isn't that cool? What are all those little points of light? How come the moon moves around? Why does it look like a cookie with a bite out of it sometimes? And then what are these things called eclipses? And so that kind of curiosity just led me into astronomy. And then I got into photography. And so combining photography with astronomy is just a natural thing to do, where you get different kinds of film, and then you find that you're sensitizing it, and you're using a single lens reflex camera with film, and trying to record all the stuff that you're seeing with your homemade telescope. So I've been interested in astronomy probably since 6th or 7th grade.
Yeah, it seems like most people have that, and of course nowadays you're well aware everyone wants to take pictures of stuff, so that transition happens naturally nowadays, and I know that hasn't stopped you even now being an astronaut. Those images that you tend to capture when you're in orbit continue, and I know that's something that we'll probably get into here in a little bit. But what's interesting, I think, about you, as opposed to, everyone has their story of how they got started in astronomy and they got their first telescope and their hobby has continued, but yours is a little different because now you're an astronaut and you've been to space 3 times. And so where does the interest as a kid rocket you literally into the career that you've got now?
Well, one advantage I had as a kid growing up, not only can you look at the sky and you can make a telescope and you can do stuff, hook your camera up to it, and you can try to get pictures, but I grew up during the age of the Mercury astronauts and the first Apollo missions. And so I got to watch Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. I remember when John Glenn did his first orbital flight. And so that struck a bit in my mind about Wouldn't that be cool to do that? And I just kind of filed that away for years and years and years. Became a techno uber geek, did engineering in college. And then when I was graduating from graduate school, I realized, hey, I've got all the qualifications for being an astronaut, particularly a scientist astronaut. And there happened to be an astronaut selection going on at that time. So I put in my application.
I know we've talked about this, but you've told this story before, but I think it's awesome. So I know you put in the application. Obviously, you ended up getting it at some point, but can you tell the people watching when you got the call to be an astronaut was actually kind of an interesting story in general?
Yeah, I'll get to that part, but let me first point out that I put in an application, went in for an interview, and then sometime later I got the rejection letter. And that's a pretty big slap on your ego, but it didn't dampen my interest in trying to become an astronaut. And about every 2 to 4 years, they do an astronaut selection. So I kept putting in my applications, and I kept getting reject after reject after reject, until finally I got, after the fourth interview, the fourth time of rushing NASA's door, that's when I got the call if I wanted to be an astronaut. And I was in New Zealand at the time doing volcano fumarole gas analysis. And we had been chased off of the volcano because of a real nasty storm. And there was like 8 of us in a little tiny cottage that was about the size of a garage, sleeping with this huge storm pounding us. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from Houston wanting to know if I was still interested in being an astronaut.
I think that's awesome how you're basically in a volcano and then get asked to be an astronaut on top of that. So I know you've got tons of stories like that, and I know those have progressively gotten more interesting the more you've been involved with NASA. I know, so we've talked about this before on other events. For kids, or because I know there's some educators that are watching today or will be watching this recorded, but for students or kids that are out there today, they're obviously seeing what's happening with, SpaceX and Blue Origin, and you have all these, and NASA, of course. It's still a thing, so and it's growing. And of course, this past year, it's been crazy with the interest in astronomy spiking because everyone's stuck at home. But for kids who want to get into being an astronaut, obviously NASA just had their pick of a new selection of astronauts. But for those who want to become an astronaut, what are your words of advice for them?
Well, being an astronaut in our current age requires technical skill and knowledge. And you have to know how the spacecraft works. You have to know how to operate. You have to know how to fix it. And the reason being is space is a place where human beings weren't innately meant to go. And the only way we can go there and survive and come back and still be alive is to take a machine with us that provides us all the stuff we need in order to stay alive. And when you go into an environment like that, you need to know how your machine works. You need to know how to fix your machine because they always seem to be breaking. And that takes math and science and engineering kind of skills to know how to take care of yourself when you go into a space environment. So if that's what you want to do, then you need to take all the fun classes in school. You need to do the math. You need to do the science. You need to do the engineering. And you can branch out into all kinds of other fields. You can do biology. You can do geology. You can do any of the fields. but you have to have a good fundamental understanding of the technology that you are going to be relying on to keep you alive. So that is the technical background you need. And then you need the interest in going into space, because it's not easy. It's not like camping out in a Hilton hotel. I mean, it's like camping out in a wilderness. You may not have the kind of food you want. You may be limited in all kinds of other supplies. And things can go bad in a short order when you're in the wilderness of space. So you have to be prepared, just like you do when you're camping in the wilderness. And that isn't for everybody.
Yeah, and I know it's really tough when you're in something that hospitable. Now, and I know that's even advancing further, because obviously you've been to the space station several times, but now we're talking about going to new worlds at that point, where the moon is now aggressively and quickly becoming the next target in the very foreseeable future. And then, of course, Mars, and we just had Perseverance land, so I don't know if that's affected the thought process in the astronaut program even further.
We watch what those folks at JPL do with envy, because they seem they're like, well, all engineers at NASA, they're like gymnasts in the Olympics. They go through their routine. It's really, really difficult, but they could go through a routine with a smile on their face and it looks so easy. But you fundamentally know that what they just did was really, really difficult and took a lot of skill. And the folks at JPL and other facilities at NASA have this ability where they take something that's really, really complex, really, really difficult to do, and they make it look like it's so easy.
We've got a couple friends over at JPL that worked on the Mars mission Perseverance that just landed, and they were asking what we thought about it, and it's like, of course, it was phenomenal to just watch it look like it went off without a hitch. But that I'm sure you've been there even during a launch, where you're just going down this massive checklist hoping every single one of those little things goes off without a hitch. So
yeah.
So it's always cool to see where things are going, and of course now the new mission for the moon is getting pretty close to becoming a thing. What's your take on this next series or chapter that NASA's entering? I know, being an astronaut, they're picking who's gonna go on certain missions, so I didn't know what your thought is. For those watching, would you go to the moon? Would you go to I think you're slated to do another mission, but what are your thoughts on where you would prefer to go?
Okay, let me first comment about the Artemis program. And the Artemis program is the program to go beyond low Earth orbit. And this includes making an orbital complex. Think of it as a miniature space station, a mini space station, comprised of maybe 2 or 3 modules, that's in a high altitude orbit. We call it a halo orbit around the moon. And that's a good staging location. And then we have the Orion spacecraft that'll go to this orbital complex. And from there, we can get on a dedicated lunar landing vehicle and land on the moon. And we're going to start off with 6-day missions to the moon, and then expand that after we build up assets at one location, so that we can actually have a lunar base with a sustained effort and a crew size of at least 4 crew members and rover vehicles and significant scientific and engineering capability.
Yeah, it's phenomenal that in the next several years that we're going to be seeing, hopefully, the return to the moon at that point.
Yeah, and let me point out, the moon Mars is an amazing place. We all want to get to Mars. But if you look at how difficult these things are, when you have a human being or multiple human beings on the spacecraft with all the life support and all the things needed to keep us alive and happy, going to the moon is the next logical step. It's just a few days away from Earth. If things go bad, you've got multiple abort options. Even with our most advanced space technology that we really don't have operating yet on the scale necessary for human beings, which are some of these electric propulsion, high specific impulse electric thruster schemes, we could possibly get to Mars in 6 to 9 months one way. If we use the standard burn and coast kind of techniques, it's still basically a year to get there and a year to come home and a year to 2 years on the surface, because you got to wait for things to get lined up, and you just can't come home anytime you want. So the time element with Mars is what makes these missions so difficult when you have a human being involved, and the abort options are so few and far between. Where on the moon, you can go there multiple times a month. It's a few days there, a few days back, and it's a good way to get your technology working, the bugs worked out of it, so that when you go off for multiple years at a time, you have a high reliability on your equipment.
Yeah, it's almost like where we currently are with the ISS. It's like in a way, that's the beach of the ocean, and then the moon would be the dock to go out to the deep waters.
Yeah, or I like to look at it, going to the moon is like sailing in the Mediterranean. And going to Mars is like sailing across the Atlantic.
Yeah. A nice weekend getaway versus a month-long excursion. So
yeah.
So now that obviously the Artemis missions and the moon missions are picking crew for them, if you had your choice of going to the moon or going to the ISS, what would you personally like?
Oh gosh, I'll do any mission that my management wants me to do. I really like being in space for a long period of time. I seem to come alive on orbit, and the longer I could stay there, the better adapted, the more efficient, and it's such a cool environment. You almost hate to come back to Earth. The lunar missions, at least the initial ones, are going to be shorter missions. And the first few missions are going to be really centered on nailing down the technology, which means the approach and landing phase of flight, because that's really, really critical. And it makes sense for the first few crews going to the moon that they have to be the best fighter pilot, test pilot kind of people that you can find in the astronaut corps. And then, later on, you can start to send the scientist types like myself. But initially, you need to stack the deck towards the people that live and breathe flying a highly dynamic machine. And then later, you can send the people that live and breathe thinking about doing science in the environment that you happen to be in.
So at that point, you'd prefer to spend more time in space than a short jog to the moon.
Yeah,
if you had your choice.
Like I say, I'll take any mission the management wants me to fly, any mission that the management thinks I've got the right skill set to do. Currently, and going back to station would be great. Doing a moon mission would be great.
Just being in space would be awesome. I'm
happy to do all of the above.
As long
Send
as
me
you're
to
in
Mars if we had the capability, but we don't.
As long as you're in space, you're happy.
Yeah.
You need your space. So real quick question on that. When you go back to, obviously this would depend on the mission there, but would you wanna hitch a ride on one of the Falcon capsules?
I'm a mercenary. I'll ride on anybody that has a rocket. And if you look at the choices we have now, we could fly on the Russian Soyuz, and I've flown twice on the Russian Soyuz vehicle, one round trip and one deorbit coming back to Earth. And if you look at the American vehicles, we currently have the SpaceX Dragon as a commercial vehicle. The Boeing Starliner is going to be coming online here soon. And then we've got several other commercial companies with spacecraft, either suborbital or orbit spacecraft that they're working on, and they will be coming online in the years to come. And then we'll have the NASA Orion spacecraft, which is specifically designed for going away from planet Earth.
Got quite a selection in the fleet coming online.
And I'm happy to fly on any and all of the above.
Yeah. It's a 737 or a 777, you're fine.
Yeah.
Nice. So having said that, having been to the space station, and just being in space in general, I think you get this probably a lot, but what's it like to experience that? Because, I mean, you go from training to the rocket launch to orbit to, oh my God, I'm on the space station and there's Earth kind of a thing.
Yeah, there's several cool aspects about being in space. One is you're weightless. And that is a totally foreign experience to a creature that walks on two legs on the surface of planet Earth. And it is an incredibly delightful situation to find yourself in. And it takes a while to adapt. It takes a while to learn how to expertly float around. And everybody I've seen that goes into space within a week or so adapt really well. And as you spend more time in space, you develop more finesse in terms of how you move and your ability to juggle multiple small objects at a time. And you just figure out how to do it without losing stuff floating off in all directions. So that's one aspect, and it's incredibly delightful. And then there's what you can see when you look out the window. And from the orbital height, which is about 240 miles, 400 kilometers, from that height, you can see Earth on the length scale of half a continent. And you can be over center of Australia, and you can see both the East Coast and the West Coast at the same time. It's phenomenal. If you're over the United States, you cannot see the East Coast and the West Coast at the same time. But you can see the West Coast, and you can see maybe just past Kansas. And so you get to see Earth on a length scale that you are not used to observing Earth. And this length scale allows you to see detail that you can't observe when you are closer to the subject. So you can see detail in terms of mountain ranges and structure and basin and range, a geology that you see in the western part of the United States. You can see rift zones. You can there's so much structure that you can see on this length scale that you can't see if you're in an airplane or your feet are on the ground. And then the colors, the colors of particularly the blues of the oceans are just amazing. And then you turn your head upwards, and that's an Earth-centric view, because there's really no up and down. But if you look upwards and look at the stars during an orbital night period, they are amazingly bright, simply because you're out of the atmosphere, and the atmosphere spoils a lot of the contrast between objects, particularly objects like Andromeda, M31. You could just pick up M31 with your eye without any issue at all, where you have to be fairly dark adapted and look in the right spot and kind of look at it out of the corner of your eye in order to see Andromeda down here. But in space, you just look at it and it's like, oh, there's Andromeda. And then the large and small Magellanic Clouds are just amazing. You can see colors in the Milky Way that just don't make it through our atmosphere. And then you can see both northern and southern hemisphere constellations at the same time. So that's an amazing aspect in terms of what you can see from an amateur astronomy point of view.
I just wanted to bring up this picture real quick. It's probably my favorite of you. I'm not sure which one of your colleagues shot it, but this is you in probably your favorite spot, looking at the stars and the cupola out there.
Yeah, actually, Kevin, that's a self-portrait. And I set the camera up on basically the equivalent of a zero-gravity tripod, a little arm structure in the Russian segment, in this one window that views the U.S. segment. And then I probably had close to 60 meters of passages to translate through in order to poke my head up into the cupola. And then I had a little weak flashlight that I shined on my face so that you could see my face inside of the cupola. And I probably had to take dozens and dozens of pictures until I got one that was the way I wanted. But anyway, that's a self-portrait I did early one Sunday morning when everybody else was asleep.
That actually brings me to a topic. My next question for you is, obviously, when you're on station, you guys have a list of things that you need to be doing during the day. You have work to do, but you do have time off at times. What do you ultimately enjoy doing with your free time on station?
Okay, let me first talk a little bit about the work environment, because the crew goes into space to do work, and it's either research, engineering research or scientific research, or maintenance on the space station itself. And you're kept really, really busy. Your day starts at 7 a.m. and you are scheduled with activities throughout the day until 7 p.m. So you're expected to work a 12-hour day, and you can never get everything done that they want you to do in the time period that they give you. It's just, go figure. It always takes longer to get things done. And so we typically work 13 to 14 hours a day, and we'll do that 5.5 to 6 days a week. And so anytime when you're off duty, and I like to use the term off duty because it isn't like you have spare time, because there's no spare time. It isn't like you have free time, because there's no free time, because you're on this highly dynamic platform that you need, like a sleeping mother cat, you need to keep one eye open to watch the kittens. And so you're always on edge. However, you do have off-duty time where you're off duty now until 7 a.m. And what do you do? And so what I would do is imagery. I would do any number of just standard photography of Earth, to internal photography, to amateur astronomy, and that became one of my favorite things to do during the off-duty time. And then I had a number of educational demonstrations that I enjoyed working on, just to show students how unique of an environment this is, and how things don't necessarily work the same way they do on planet Earth.
It's I don't know. I could go on for hours talking to you about your experience. I know you could too, because it's so special. But I know one thing that you're kind of well known for is making your basically the space coffee cup.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
And I happen to have one here because I knew you were going to talk about it. And here it is. And it's got uh, it's got the NASA logo on it. And then what I really think is cool is see that that's a logo that I put inside, and it's a 0G.
that's awesome.
So it's a big 0 with a little G inside. Instead of a big G and a little O, it's a big O with a little G. And then the shape of this is defined from the mathematics of fluid physics applied in a weightless environment to make an open container. Because a standard open container like this guy just does not work in a weightless environment. Our standard open containers are really gravity machines, and they depend on gravity to operate, and they just won't work. But this shape, coupled with the fluid physics in microgravity, allows you to drink and sip from an open container. And this allows us to imbibe our coffee and our tea in a manner that's commensurate with how we sip these beverages on Earth from an open container. Because before these coffee cups, we had to drink all our coffee from basically a juice bag through a straw, and you can't smell the coffee. Maybe 60% of the effect of sipping coffee comes from the smell, and when you sip it through a straw, it's more like flavored hot water. So these this is really a cool application of surface tension and math in a weightless environment to give back to the crew members a little detail that you're taking from home so that you can continue on any number of rituals with your crew members after a hard day's work, or just simply want to enjoy a cup of coffee.
That's another just cool thing about what you guys have done up there. So I appreciate you sharing that with everybody.
Before you, I have one more detail that I want to go on. So we actually have two different patents on the 0G coffee cup. And as you can imagine, there's not a lot of demand for that, so you make 6 of them, but it turns out the fluid physics and the design strategy behind the 0G coffee cup is now being used by NASA for a contingency urine collector. So imagine something that kind of looks like your coffee cup, but it has a long plastic bag attached to it. And if the toilet breaks, you can use this bag assembly to collect urine in a way that it won't splash out and make a mess and all of that. And the fluid physics keeps the urine well contained in the bag, and then you can seal it all up. So I'm happy to report that perhaps one of the first practical applications of my space cup is for a urine container.
When you're in space, you got to think about, you don't just roll down the window. I mean, you got to figure it out.
Yeah, and this is an example of the great circle of a technological invention. And so you start off with coffee, you drink your coffee using the coffee cup technology. And then when it's time to use the toilet that's broken, you can use your coffee cup technology to get rid of your coffee for recycle. So it's all part of the great circle of life in a space environment while you're going in circles.
There you go. It's all linked.
It's all linked.
So for those of you who want to see some cool pictures, you've got some cool stuff on your official Facebook page that NASA has you do. You were up in orbit during the Venus transit, wasn't that correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I'm still working on some of the images on that. As part of my personal kit, and NASA allows you to fly a small bag of personal stuff. And as long as it passes a safety review, they have no issue with what you pack in there. And being an amateur astronomer, and knowing that there were no solar filters on station, I packed one of the Mylar solar filters, and I had it sized so it would fit on our telephoto lenses that we have on station. Yeah, there it is. Oh, good. And so that's the solar filter put on the front of a 1200 millimeter telephoto lens. And this is an f5.6 lens. So that's a big hunk of glass, And with that lens, the circular disk of either the moon or the sun basically fills the vertical height on a 35 millimeter or FX size sensor. So it's perfect for solar imagery. And yes, that's one of my images of the transit of Venus. And there happened to be a few sunspots at the same time. So that was kind of neat. And I got, I think, 2 out of the 4 contacts imaged. There was some structural blockage from our solar panels, and 2 out of the 4 contacts happened when the sun was behind a solar panel. But I did get 2 of the contacts. And what I'm working on now with the images, and I took hundreds of images during the course of the transit. If you think of space station orbiting Earth, when it's on one extreme edge of the orbit to the other extreme edge of the orbit, you have the parallax, basically, of the diameter of Earth for your observation. And if you plot all these images that I took of the transit of Venus, it makes the transit, instead of going across as a smooth line like it would on Earth, it's a sine wave. It wiggles. And the amplitude of that sine wave is an indication of the parallax because of the extreme ends of your orbit. So what I need to do is sit down with that measurement and use that to calculate the magnitude, the length of the astronomical unit, to see how that compares with the data that was gathered from Captain Cook's transit of Venus expeditions back in, I think that was 1770 something, when they did that specifically to get parallax measurements for determining the length of the astronomical unit. So it would be a space age twist to an old calculation, and it would be interesting to see what kind of number I could get just from a casual amateur astronomy observation on space station. And that's TBD work on my part.
That's awesome. I know there's a bunch of questions I could ask you, but I know we're running into constraints so we can do a QA. Real quick, this kind of relates to one of the questions as well. What are your plans for future missions?
Oh, well, I want to continue doing solar observations on space station, exoatmospheric, and I'm working with a colleague on making a hydrogen alpha type solar filter, but not at the hydrogen alpha wavelength, but tweaked at an oxygen absorption line, which does not get through our atmosphere. It's right around 762 nanometers. And so, or 763 nanometers. And so this wavelength in that very narrow slice does not get through our atmosphere because of the oxygen absorption. And so I want to observe the sun at that wavelength just to see what we might see. And if you look at the sun with just a neutral density filter from orbit, you're not going to see the detail that you can from an extremely narrow band filter that's a half an angstrom bandwidth. And looking at the sun with a standard hydrogen alpha filter from orbit probably isn't going to buy you any more than what you could do from the surface of Earth, because that wavelength transmits through our atmosphere without a lot of issues. But this wavelength at the oxygen absorption band, I'm thinking it might be interesting to look at the image of the solar disk at that wavelength just to see what detail might pop out. So that's one of the projects I'm working on right now.
Oh, I'll be really curious to see what you can get when you're up there again. And how that
who
out.
knows? And this is why we go into a frontier. You go into a frontier, the answers are not in the back of the book, and you may have to figure something out for yourself. And the normal way of walking and talking in terms of life back home may not apply when you go into a frontier. And you oftentimes don't even know what to expect. And so maybe you could say, wow, what's going to happen at this oxygen wavelength that has trouble getting through our Earth's atmosphere? Well, maybe there won't be anything special. It might just look sort of like a hydrogen alpha filtered sun. Who knows what it's going to look like? But maybe it's going to look really cool. Who knows? There could be something of scientific interest that comes from it, because you would be looking at the sun under oxygen wavelength emissions.
That's why that's science.
You
gotta ask the question. So
yeah, and you can't be disappointed if you make a measurement like that and go, ho hum, okay, that was interesting, but I don't see anything useful in it. And then you just move on to the next thing. So you never can let your disappointment dampen your interest in doing these investigations.
I know this is my last question, then we'll flip it over. I know example of that, you had talked about when we were hanging out, like a Texas Star Party or something, you were messing around with a water bottle that had like salt or sugar or some particle in it, and you were messing around with it, and the particles were clumping together, and you screwing around in orbit with this water bottle actually ended up proving something about planetary formation.
Oh yeah. And it was a big plastic bag, and I was growing sodium chloride crystals from the salt solution that we put on our food, because you can imagine a salt shaker doesn't work in a weightless environment. So they have a saturated solution, a sodium chloride in a squeeze bottle, and you can squeeze that on your food if you want to add salt to it. It's a real smart engineering way to deal with how do you put salt on your food if you so desire more salt. And nobody was using the salt. And so a bunch of these little bottles had accumulated. And so I started to grow sodium chloride crystals from this salt solution by letting it evaporate. And actually have 3 scientific papers published on that, 2 in the Journal of Crystal Growth and 1 in the Nature Journal of Microgravity Research on sodium chloride crystallization. But what do you do with these crystals when you're done with them? Well, I just kept them in a plastic bag, something like a gallon Ziploc baggie. And shaking these crystals around, I noticed that they would clump together on their own. So these were millimeter-sized crystals clumping together rather quickly. And I shot a lot of video on this. I did a number of different solid systems that we had, like powdered milk and coffee and other things. And with the help of a colleague, another astronaut, Stan Love, who is a planetary scientist, or he was one before he got selected, and he still is one. And he recognized that this clumping had a value in terms of planetary formation. So with Stan and some other co-authors, we wrote, I think, 3 different papers on particle agglomeration in an orbital environment with its application to planetary formation. And since then, there have been at least 2 other formal experiments flown on space station looking at larger particles and how they behave when they're in close proximity to each other, and their ability to agglomerate. So that's a fun story in terms of just goofing around doing something else, and then making a clandestine observation, and then having it fill a needed hole in the knowledge of how planets can form from cosmic dust. And anyway, that's why you go to a frontier.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know we have a couple questions. I'll try to get through them. I know we have a little bit of time before I got to let you get back to, important NASA stuff. First question is, how is NASA handling COVID, especially for crew members soon to be going to station?
Okay, we follow all the standard rules for COVID, and I keep in my pocket here. I keep my little mask, and we have left over from my missions are these little temporary tattoos that you give out to all the kids. And I had a whole stack of these tattoos. And so I thought, what should I do with the tattoos? And so I put the tattoos on my mask. And so that way I've got my mission patch, temporary tattoo on my mask. We wear masks whenever we are outside of our homes. And I probably do training with T-38 flying and simulator flying and the NBL runs where we get in the great white EVA suit and we go underwater and we practice EVA. I probably do that equivalent 2 days a week. And the other 3 days, I like everyone else, I sit in front of my computer and yawn while I'm doing PowerPoint training and other things.
Nice. I know we're all just trying to get through it.
Yeah, and it does slow down your work effort. And I also find that if you're working with a group of engineers, maybe there's 10 people, you're all teamed into a meeting, and the social dynamics is a little bit awkward in terms of stepping on each other and talking. And I work so much better face to face, but it's better than not doing anything at all. And so, we're just adapting and doing the best job we can. It's a little bit slower than normal. Maybe we don't get as many ideas thrown out in the same amount of time, but we are making advancements both on the Artemis program and in the astronaut training. And then we go in equivalent about 2 days a week for doing all sorts of other activities. I've been looking at some of the displays for the Orion spacecraft for ascent and for rendezvous and docking. Earlier this week, I went in for a rendezvous and docking evaluation with the Orion spacecraft going into the Gateway orbital complex. And so it's like, wow, this is actually turning into something real. And we've got real hardware actually sitting at the Cape ready to launch or getting ready to launch. And it's like, wow, this is a real hopping place.
Awesome. This is a good one for the students. What kind of student were you? I know, like in high school and elementary, you get some people where they might have a hard time with math or science or whatever, but they've still grown into someone different. How were you in school?
There was a time in grade school, and I didn't know this until after I was adult. My parents were wondering whether I could even learn to read. And I was probably reading at a you know, at least one, maybe two grade levels below all my other classmates. And then my brain really didn't kick on until probably sixth or seventh grade. And that's when all of a sudden it's like the cobwebs get out of your brain and you figure stuff out, and then after that you never look back. You keep reading, you watch ants walking on the ground, you look at the bumblebees, you do your gardening, you do your photography, you do your amateur astronomy. I mean, you just explode after that. But as a school kid, school was tough on me at the grade school level, and now there'd probably be some kind of a syndrome that they would have diagnosed me with, but at the time I grew up, nobody thought about that kind of stuff. And then once I hit high school, it was like the sky's not the limit. It's like I just became a techno uber geek, and then the same thing in college. And the more technical the classes, the more I liked them.
I think that's important for kids out there to realize. Just because you're not adapting where it is now doesn't mean that's the person you're going to be in the future. So I appreciate you.
And the important thing is don't give up. Whatever interests you have, keep doing those interests. Don't give up, and you will find some level where you will be happy being.
Yeah. No, that's great. I really appreciate you. As someone who does outreach, I really appreciate that question. Let me look through some of these. What was the hardest part of your training? Or is part of your training, because it hasn't stopped?
Yeah, the hardest part of my training by far is Russian language. And I've been taking 1 to 2 Russian language classes, typically an hour and a half to 2 hours a class, every week since 1999. So I've got a lot of Russian language class, and I can, I have trouble speaking Russian. I've been doing this, and I can get by, particularly in a cockpit, in a spacecraft or an airplane, because you tend to speak in short, simple grammatical construction, but to recite Russian poetry or to look out over the mountains and say the diaphanous clouds are draped over the mountains with the pinkish sunset and the rays coming. I would have a hard time doing that. I could talk like Tarzan. See sun, see mountains. Oh, beautiful. That's how I would sound in Russian. And it's just my brain is not wired for the language, but I work hard at it, and I've been working hard at it since 1999. So I guess that's 22 years of Russian language class. And I can get by, but I've had some of my colleagues be able to far outstrip my ability to speak Russian after a couple of years of classes. So anyway, that's hard for me. Sitting down with a 2-inch stack of technical documents with tensor equations and all this other stuff, no problem. Learning the finer points of Russian grammar, particularly with verbs of motion, I have trouble getting my brain wrapped around that.
Oh, that's a point I think a lot of people wouldn't even think of. I know we're wrapping up on questions. We are getting more in there, but we're pretty tight on time. NASA's got a tight schedule. Let's see. Probably the last one, because I know you answer stuff really thoroughly, which is, we get a lot of good comments about it. So this will be the last one I think we can hit. What was Don's most memorable experience in space?
I was going to work really hard just to answer this question with a yes or a no. And then you ask the question that I can't do that, because I wanted to be able to at least answer one question without talking for 5 minutes. Gosh, the most memorable moment. The most memorable moment was being on station when Columbia burned up and I lost a bunch of good friends.
I can't imagine being in that. That actually wasn't even the answer I was expecting to hear either. So that.
Yeah, I gave that because, I could talk about, wow, we could fly like Peter Pan, or, I mean, there's all kinds of memorable moments
generic
like that.
stuff, but that's.
But I just wanted to share that you can have memorable moments that aren't necessarily pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And they are burned into your brain, and you need to use them for the story that they can tell. And the story that tells is flying in space is not without risk. And it's kind of like flying airplanes when they were made out of wood and silk. And it's not it's something that you have to think carefully about. Why do I want to fly into space? Because it offers a certain level of risk, and it's a real harsh environment. And because of the energies involved, the kinetic energy of orbit is immense. It's the kinetic energy of orbit is about 30 megajoules per kilogram. And that's about the heat of combustion from TNT. So think about, if you had an avatar following you around in orbit, your body weight, but made out of TNT. And if the energy of orbit gets released in any other way other than what the engineers designed it for, it's like that avatar of TNT gives you a big hug and then detonates. So it's not so much the distance of orbit that separates you from Earth, it's the energy of orbit, and it's the energy that ramps up the danger of getting into orbit, both from the launch phase and then coming back home phase. So that's the lesson that's worth remembering when I think about what happened to my colleagues in Columbia.
I appreciate you taking that personal memoir right there, because I know you could have given the generic answers, which, is fun for kids and stuff, and we all appreciate that too, but it is something that when you are doing stuff like this, or anything science related, that does come with some inherent risk, and you should always have that at the back of your mind when you're doing that. So I really appreciate you taking that. So I know you've got other stuff to do. I know it's that bewitching hour at this point. So I really appreciate, as do everybody watching, taking the time today and talking with us and hanging out with us. Hopefully, maybe we can do it again. But thank you very much for your time this morning.
Oh, my pleasure. And for sure, let's plan to do this again, because talking about amateur astronomy combined with traveling into space are two of my favorite subjects. And like I say, I could talk about this stuff for hours.
Well, I know how to get in touch with you. So
okay.
We'll be talking. But thank you very much. Have a great weekend. And, of course, stay safe out there, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Take care. Bye now.
All right. Let me go. All right, everyone. That's it for today's episode. Thank you very much. Big shout out to Don for taking the time, his time this morning from Houston. And sounds like we'll definitely have him back on. We'll definitely let you guys know if that's a thing. Please have a great weekend. Go out and observe the night sky. It's a big bright moon. Go look at the moon. See where we're going next. So have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we will catch you guys next week for another What's Up Webcast. Take care, everybody. See ya.